Spain Now is the annual platform for contemporary arts and culture from Spain in London. This is our 4th year, so it's a pleasure to have you here with us for our last event. The remit that the panel were given by the curators was to look at the life of the city from a very many perspectives and disciplines, and what it means to be a citizen from those very many different perspectives, and the collaborations that arise from architecture to design, art, sociology, etc.
So we have 3 angles from which the topic of sustainability is approached: technology and science, ecology, and economy and politics. We are going to approach the sustainability from a very different angle, and from a much more critical angle, as I understand it, namely the angle of the social and the cultural, and concepts such as participation, citizenship, making the invisible visible will play an important role in what Nerea and Ariadna are going to say.
It's interesting to see that in none of our presentations, for example, there was nothing green, there was no technology embedded into it, which are of course necessary tools and are part of an idea of taking care in a very precise way of the environment, but there's other strategies as well, and how we can talk about them, discuss them, and even interact with them as architects.
I'm not in the business of building. I work in cultural management. I am a curator. So I work through communication of architecture and urbanism. And what you see now is not a Ryanair map or British Airways map. It's a map of the city of Madrid. Each point is where the offices of the emerging architects were in 2006.
Instead of representing only the offices and where were they located in space, the idea was trying to map the ecology of the environment in which architects were producing, studying, teaching, learning, and it included not only their own offices but also where they had studied, their locations, physical locations, materiality objects. So it was including like a whole set of parameters, as you can see on the left, that was trying to expand the idea of production, not an isolated issue or process, but something that is highly engaged within a very, very intense and active context. This project works a little bit more on the idea that awareness can change things. The idea of making visible the microscopic components of the air can allow us to see differently eventually, or from a different perspective, our cities, how we interact with them, how to work with them as urbanists or architecture designers. This was a research project that we did collaboratively with a team of 30 people along the time. The basic tool is this application in which one can see the different components of the air geolocalized and described in time through these meshes. And that allows us to identify very clearly this idea of environmental justice, for example, and see which areas of the city are always in bad terms. As you can see in the red, when they get to the red level, it's because they have passed the limits accepted by the EU. So the idea was not only to produce this tool, which could be accessed from any digital device, but also to see what would happen if we transfer this information to the public space? Which kind of citizenship does this generate? Does it produce debate? Does it produce collective knowledge production? Does it produce fear? Nobody cares? And see what happens. So this was a prototype of a diffuse facade, what we called, which is a cloud of water vapor that gets colored according to the density and the intensity of each component along time. So it not only describes the quality of the air, but also transforms it through its humidity.
Maybe one could say that one way of conceiving of existence, of our way of being, of existing in the city, for example, of existing with others, is to conceive of it as an existence that is justified and that therefore can be sustained. I become a member of a network. I make myself visible. I try to make my voice heard. My sense is that perhaps there is also a different kind of existence, be a non-justified, non-sustainable existence. Well, clearly it would be an existence in a way for which there is no map, that withdraws, and that seeks places which remain invisible.
How would you describe, if you had to, one of these non-justified, non-sustainable spaces? By which means? You don't map them, you don't register them, because what is very difficult, so if one tries to, like many of those, of the projects try to open up all those spaces, but what is very difficult is to describe them to an audience, because how do you talk about them?
I remember reading years ago a novel, but I forgot the title, by a wonderful Spanish novelist at the time called Belén Gopegui. And in that novel by Belén Gopegui, it's all about, again, finding a hole in the world that will allow you to disappear. Yes. So I think for me the real challenge to architects, even if you have a very, how shall I put it, a very refined, sophisticated, complicated, unexpected notion of architecture as you have, not a traditional one, would be this kind of withdrawal. You know, because how can you react to that? The moment that you build a space for such an existence, it becomes yet another example of a justified existence. How can architecture, as it were, make such an existence sustainable, as it were? That is, how can architecture allow for an erasure of traces?
Your provocation at the beginning of saying the solitude actually before network is kind of a non-starter, because actually solitude happens within networks.
Yes.
And so I believe that's exactly where these two come from,
Yes.
and where this transformative network do create this moment much more than just old-fashioned architecture where somebody can just hide within.
Yes.
All spaces are contextual, all of them suggest different types of performances. What is interesting to research on is how they can allow different types of behavior to happen, how they can try not to exclude certain types of groups or identities, etc. So the idea is to try to find the differences within those spaces, but not necessarily understanding that architecture by itself is constraining or forcing people to behave in one way. I think that idea is very problematic.